Yamar Joba, Dobry Din, Buenos Dias, and good evening. It's a pleasure for me to have this opportunity to moderate this panel. And we're talking about an essential topic, the lessons learned from elections during the pandemic. And it's fitting that we have a panel, we have four outstanding panelists, and they're people who have had to actually deal with this in the most direct of all ways. And we'll hear a variety of ways in which they have been able to confront the challenges of organizing elections in this kind of a situation with COVID-19. And it's particularly interesting because this year has 2020, there are over 84 countries who have elections that are scheduled, and of those, at least 64 have postponed to one time or another election sometime during this year. So this panel is going to have a big challenge today. And before I introduce the panelists, I just wanted to mention, because we have four panelists, I would request that each one of you try to stick as much as possible within the 8-minute time limit. We won't take questions until the very end, so I would like to follow what our friend Alan did in the previous panel and just suggest that you think about your questions, you go ahead and submit them, and once our final speaker has finished, then we'll go and we'll answer your questions as time permits. And I believe we have until 7:15 in the evening in Tbilisi time. So following that is going to be the closing session and wrap up. So with that, I would like to take this opportunity to first off thank all the organizers, ACEEO, the Georgian CEC, all you, the participants, and in particular our distinguished panelists. Today we have from the State Election Commission of Croatia, Damir Kontrek, Vice President. Then from the Central Election Commission of Lithuania, we have Laura Majotsaitica, who is the chairperson. From the State Election Commission of North Macedonia, we have Inver Saljihi, who is a member of the commission. And our last speaker today will be Krzysztof Lorenz, who is the head of Department for the National Electoral Commission of Poland. So with that, we'll turn the floor over to our first speaker, and I'd ask Damir Kontrek to join us, and please make your presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon from Zagreb. Good afternoon from Croatia. On behalf of the Croatian State Electoral Commission, I present you in following few minutes some lessons learned from the elections during the pandemic. First of all, COVID-19 had an impact of the timing of the elections, as the elections were expected to be held in the autumn this year, towards the end of the constitutional term to hold the elections. However, due to the good epidemiological situation in Croatia, the ruling party assessed that it will be better to hold election in early summer. Upon this solution of the parliament in May, the President of the Republic called the election for 5th July. No amendments were needed to the election legislation since the elections were held within the constitutional period for ordinary parliamentary elections. Secondly, the Commission was well aware the additional legal framework had to be created in a short time in order to ensure the conduct of election in a safe and lawful manner given the pandemic. The Commission took therefore contact with the Civil Protection Authority that was operationally governing the state response to the COVID-19 and with the Croatian Institute for Public Health. It was of utmost importance to put in place measures which would ensure safe conduct of the whole election process, starting with the collection of signatures to support the candidacy, the delivery of the candidacy to the Commission, conduct of the election campaign, and the mayor election day. Those measures had to balance the right to vote and right to political participation in a safe manner on one hand, and the right to health of all election participants on the other hand. As a result, the Croatian Institute for Public Health issued 3 recommendations. One, for securing epidemiological measures regarding the collection of voters' signatures. The second relating to election gatherings, election campaign. And the third relating to the work of electoral bodies. Those recommendations defined the need of social distancing, use of masks, taking record of person present, special requirements for the facilities such as cleaning, disinfecting, aeration, the maximum number of persons present, etc. Additionally, the Commission issued, in cooperation with the Croatian Institute for Public Health, 2 additional technical instructions with respect to the election day. One relating to voting on election day at the polling station in general, and the other relating to voting at the polling station in social welfare institutions. It is to be noted that the Parliamentary Election Act foresees the competency of the Commission to deliver mandatory instruction for the conduct of elections. So the competency was applied to deliver the mentioned technical instructions. The technical instructions defined in detail the manner in which election day was to be held in order to ensure safety to all participants. The Commission provided, in the cooperation with the government, the necessary equipment for polling station and polling committees members. As mentioned before, the balance of the right to vote and right to health was the most challenging part in the preparation of these instructions. A right balance for the COVID-19 infected voters was found by the introduction of the ability for them to vote with the help of a trusted third person. In such cases, polling station committee members would arrive upon request in front of the entrance door of the COVID-19 infected voters, residents, where the trusted third person would fill in the ballot paper in accordance with the instruction received by the COVID-19 diagnosed voter. Any direct contact between COVID-19 positive voter and polling station committee members was strictly forbidden. Although those recommendations and technical instructions did not foresee any sanction for the breach, election participants did abide, so we can conclude that the stakeholders welcomed the said measures. Furthermore, there were no reports that due to the conduct of election, the number of COVID-19 infected persons rose. So one could conclude that the implementation of measures in place was successful, notwithstanding the slightly lower voter turnout as opposite to previous parliamentary elections. My personal remark is that the conduct of this election was very challenging, as it required the fast decisions, balancing the right to vote of COVID-19 infected or self-isolate persons elderly people in social welfare institutions, and the right to protect the health of the other election participants. At the end, given all the obstacles surpassed and the fact that the Constitutional Court affirmed the constitutionality and legality of the conducted elections, I allow myself to assess that the elections were held in a very successful manner. As a legacy of parliamentary election, in case of early local election, one expected to be held in October, more already held in July and September, local elections committees were urged to contact the epidemiological authorities to amend, if necessary, the epidemiological framework for the conduct of collection. We do hope that by the time of the next state election, which are statewide local elections to be held in May next year, the pandemic will be over, but if not, the path has already been set for setting to adequate epidemiological framework for the conduct of the pandemic election. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you very much, and thank you for adhering to our time frame. Again, if you have questions, please go ahead and prepare them and send them, but we won't open the floor until we actually have completed with all the speakers. So our next speaker is Madam Chairperson from CECEEO Lithuania, Laura Maidžo-Sautytė. Laura, please.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Dirkhat, for the floor. As everybody knows, I hope knows, Lithuania will hold general elections on October 11. And the law provides for a wide range of alternative voting methods, including early postal and out-of-country voting. Voters who cannot go to their polling station on election day can vote in advance at municipalities. Postal voting via designated service is allowed for voters in health and social care institutions, prisons and detention centers, and who's in military service. Although elections take years of planning, unplanned COVID-19 pandemic disrupted many plans and raised many election organizing issues around the world. Lithuania is not an exception. Of course, the fastest and safest way to organize elections is not to break the current rules and to organize elections as much as it's possible under normal conditions. But due to COVID-19 pandemic, the mission looks more than impossible. For that reason, we analyzed the practice of foreign states which organized elections this year, for example, the case of South Korea, which can be used as a model in holding elections during crises like the COVID-19 pandemic, and looking for ways and methods how to ensure the health of our society and their civil rights. In-person voting is a risky prospect right now, as public health experts warn that having large numbers of people gather in small enclosed areas like polling stations is one of the surest ways to spread extremely contagious coronavirus. For that reason, with little time to prepare, 3 months ago, we submitted a proposal to Ministry of Justice to change the law on elections to the same as, for example, we proposed to provide more polling stations for early and election day voting in countries where under inner restrictions or regulations, it's impossible to organize directly voting abroad in embassies. In such countries, to organize voting only by post. And the last day of June, our Parliament considered the amendments to the law on elections to the same as prepared special for changes of voting procedures during the pandemic. In the amendments, it was proposed that when in whole or in a part of the territory of Lithuania or in a territory of the municipality will be announced an emergency situation or an emergency event, then when the freedom of movement of persons will be temporarily restricted or other special conditions for managing the situation will be established. Voting may also be organized invest in additional equipped and eligible premises, which should be designated by the Constituency Commission. When the special situation will be declared and the CEC makes the decision, voting on election day in polling stations with more than 3,000 registered voters may take place in 2 premises in the same building. Following an announcement of a special situation, voting in advance may take place on the last Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday before election day from 7 a.m. To 8 p.m. Then under the pandemic in a foreign state wouldn't be possible to vote directly in the embassy, consular or additional polling place under a motivated proposal of Minister of Foreign Affairs. Voting in that foreign state by the decision of the CEC could be organized only by post. To hold the parliamentary elections as scheduled, we drew a special deliberate set of preventive measures to reduce risks of the virus being transmitted. The plan was coordinated with the health authorities, ministries, NGOs, other stakeholders. For example, common touch points such as polling booths will be cleaned at least once every hour and regularly disinfected. Election officials will also be equipped with protective gear such as medical masks, gloves, and hand sanitizers. In the polling station, officers will wear masks at all times. Voters will be also asked to proactively wear masks, disinfect their hands, and to observe social distancing in polling booth queues. Voters will have to wear masks, but will need to temporarily lower them or to take off for identity verification when registering to vote. And it is important to mention that our government decided that the CEC should give personal health protection equipment for each voter, for example, masks. Some time ago, we had discussions how could vote anyone with a body temperature above than 37 and 3 degrees Celsius, or voters having respiratory problems, common symptoms of the coronavirus, or voters in quarantine. And after understanding that each voter has a right to vote, we find a very rational solution. Voters in self-isolation or voters with COVID-19 symptoms will have a right to vote at home or in a hospital. It depends on the situation, but from one other side, each voter has a right to vote. Voters will sanitize their hands before receiving a ballot paper. This is, of course, to minimize the risk of contaminating ballot papers or the pens that are used in a polling station. Voters may bring their own pens. It's important to mention. We will recommend for seniors to vote from 7 to 9 a.m. Voters shouldn't bring non-voters, such as children, to the polling station. Senior voters who are required to help may be accompanied by a household member. If the whole family with a senior wishes to come together in the morning, we will still allow them to vote. And everywhere in the polling stations should be marked signs and equipment for keeping at least 1 meter safely distance between voters while voters standing in line. If there is a line to enter, voters should stand 1 meter apart. The second thing what I want to mention is the I-voting idea. Due to COVID-19 in our parliament, a group of parliamentarians registered a proposal to organize election by internet and to vote through a computer or phone. It's no doubt that internet voting can be beneficial for a wider group of people to exercise their rights. It can potentially make the voting process significantly faster for voters who are able to use it, saving the time and perhaps physical barriers it takes to travel and to and from the polling station, avoid potential queues, and allowing voters to vote quickly from home. Alternative voting methods, which may create opportunity to vote in a distance, not personally in a polling station, may decrease the danger for voters' health, which may arise due to personal voting in a polling premises. And yes, in the meantime, we have a legal framework or something like this. But after a few months of hard work for these elections, we cannot say that we have an innovative, secure information system based on advanced mathematics and cryptography. And it wasn't enough time for qualified preparation, public requirement creation of a system, security testing, trainings. But of course, voting is our future, and who knows, maybe for the next parliamentary elections, we will have such system. And the third important thing which I want to mention is the turnout. Low turnout is one of the risks of holding an election during pandemic. For that reason, we are preparing to educate voters about the measures which will be used, how election will be organized, which includes public education via TV, radio, internet advertisements on print media and other platforms. Another issue is the difficulty for candidates of communicating with voters. If countries are in lockdown, door-knocking meetings with voters might not be possible. For that reason, we are recommending candidates to search innovative methods to inform voters about themselves, to send information about themselves via internet, social media, TV, radio, and for other media. After all, the democracy has survived through many different kinds of environments. It looks different, but that doesn't mean it can't have the same fundamental components that are so important to a democracy. Voting at home or in special spots like health and social care institutions, prisons and detention centers, and who's in military service will be organized as usual, but of course there should be used personal health protection equipment. People should keep social distance, disinfect their hands. So that our nowadays plan, but we clearly understand that everything depends on the cooperation of people. And we believe as long as individuals will take all the necessary precautions, the way for the infections will be prevented and elections, the crucial democratic event will take place. If they failed to follow the rules, it could lead to another outbreak. But of course, we hope that our voters will be smart, will follow the rules, and will survive these difficult times, and elections will be held. So thank you for your attention.
Ačiū, Laura. Thank you very much. That was a fascinating presentation, and we appreciate participation. And now I'd like to turn to our next speaker, Enver Saljihi, who is a member of the State Election Commission of North Macedonia. Enver, please.
Thank you very much. It's my big pleasure today to be with all of you in this great conference. And I would like to thank all the people that are organizing this conference. I'm Enver Saljihi, okay, a member of State Election Commission of North Macedonia, and I would like to present to you a special video that I have made for this conference to look all the special measures that were taken at our elections to organize this kind of elections in time of COVID-19 crisis. So I would like to ask someone from ACEEO to play my video.
Dear colleagues, ACEEO, I'm honored today to be together with you in this great conference, but it is unusual to be apart. We hope we will be together in the near future. I'm Enver Saljihi, member of State Election Commission of North Macedonia, and I would like to present to you a manner of holding elections in our state under special measures. The early parliamentary elections were scheduled to take place on 12th of April, but due to the global outbreak of 2019's coronavirus disease, the electoral process was indefinitely suspended by the government decree. The decision was precipitated unanimous recommendation by the President of State, political party leaders, and including the opposition. The election process has continued on 18th of June 2020 with signing a code for fair elections by all representatives of lists approved as participants of elections which showed their will for democratic and fair election. The elections were held under the special measures taken by State Election Commission in accordance with authorities of healthcare system of Republic of North Macedonia. The campaign started on 24th of June and ended at 12th of July 2020. Campaign was held with small gathering in accordance with all standards made by healthcare system authorities. Political parties used paid political advertisements in media during the campaign on 28 TV stations, 52 radio stations, 12 newspapers, and 230 internet portals. The election process was monitored by civil society and international organizations. We had 2,551 domestic observers, including NGO, most civil actors. We had 158 international observers, including IFES, OSCE, ODHR, France Embassy, American Embassy, Italian Embassy, British Embassy, etc. We had 60 international journalists, Voice of America, Al Jazeera, Associated Press, Reuters, France Press, TRT from Turkey, etc. The election process was held in 3 days, 13th, 14th, and 15th of July. The 13th of July was the election process for voters infected with COVID-19 virus and voters under self-isolation measures. And from 759 applicants, voted 723 voters. According to the situation with COVID-19, we had special electoral boards consisted by medical staff which realized the voting process with masks and all equipment needed to avoid spreading the infection. The 14th of July was the election process for mobile voting at home or in hospitals, residential care institutions, and penitentiaries. The novelty was voting from all residential care institutions, promoting the equal right to vote for everyone. The election day, the 15th of July, was successfully story according to the turnout of 51.34% of voters, which is the great number even we are facing the worst health crisis ever. The process of sharing electoral materials to the polling station was realized under special protocols such as keeping physical distance of 2 meters, wearing gloves and masks, and disinfecting the means of transport before and after the process. In the election day, all 3,480 electoral boards started with disinfection of all polling stations, and all members of polling station must wear masks, gloves, and keep the distance of 2 meters. The voters could vote only one person in the polling station wearing a mask and disinfecting hands in entrance and exit, and lowering the mask for identification and keeping the distance all the time. According to all reports made by relevant domestic organizations and international organizations, the electoral process was successfully and we had fair and democratic elections. We are glad that OSCE, ODHR, and all political parties recognized our success, and we are glad there was no cluster election, which is the most important thing. This was a short presentation for our election. Wish you all the best. Hope to meet you soon together as we were last year in Ghana. All the best.
Thank you very much to everyone.
Thank you very much, Enver. That was a fascinating presentation, and we congratulate you and the Election Commission for the wonderful job that you did in organizing these elections under difficult and challenging times. So thank you. We will now turn to our last panelist, and he is from the National Electoral Commission of Poland, Krzysztof Lorenz. Please, Krzysztof.
I want to talk about something different, because the very day of election, presidential election in Poland, was not so interesting, not as interesting as the preparation and the way we came to this day and to the act under which the election was held. So I will talk about our problems with electoral law, not about the very day of election, because it was in some sense quite standard. We didn't have serious problems on the very day of voting. I have to give some background. The presidential election was declared in February, that is much before the first case of COVID in Poland. So our situation was very difficult because the pandemic came during the election when it was declared, when everything was fixed, in fact. The second factor is that the governing coalition has absolute majority in the lower house of parliament, but the opposition has majority in the upper house of parliament. Therefore, it's not so easy to change law, to make any amendments to the electoral law. And the third very important factor is that non-standard ways of voting, which are needed in such special situations, are restricted to postal and proxy voting for voters with disabilities in our electoral code. And in fact, we were not prepared for special ways of voting during pandemic. First case of COVID in Poland was observed on 4th of March, and 2 weeks later the state of the epidemic was ordered in our country. And of course, the standard restrictions affected the election campaign and preparations for the election. What were the possible solutions in such a situation? There were two main ways. Declaring the state of natural disaster, which suspends all the elections by the constitution. They are restarted 90 days after the state of natural disaster. And of course, we even could tell the exact day when it would be best to do this. This was a day after the registration of all candidates. This would stop the whole procedure at a very good moment, and when it would be restarted, we would have a standard electoral campaign and all the procedure would work quite well. Another solution was to adopt new extraordinary act establishing special rules for this special situation. I have to say that, alas, this second solution was adopted, and the first attempt to solve the problems was adopting a new act on postal voting. The idea was to organize a purely postal voting all over the country, and such an act was adopted by the lower chamber of parliament at the beginning of April. That is, a little more than a month before the election day. You have to know that the upper chamber of parliament has 30 days to decide on amendments or rejection of the act adopted by the lower chamber of parliament. Therefore, it was a great problem to have this act on time. Moreover, by another act, National Election Commission was deprived of part of its power, especially its role in preparing ballot papers, and the ballot papers should be prepared by this act by the government. That was, well, of course, because the act was under construction, and NEC would never do any preparations without valid act. So politicians decided that the government will prepare ballot papers. And here is our lesson one. Legal framework for extraordinary situations was ready to use, but it was not used. And second, such cases should not be decided by politicians, by governing majority as political decisions. They should be solved by independent bodies or by broad political agreement, which was not possible in our country. And this led us to the non-voting day on 10th of May. This attempt was completely unsuccessful. The act on postal voting was rejected by the upper chamber of parliament. It was adopted for the second time by the lower chamber, but it was too late, and there was no voting on 10th of May because it was completely impossible to organize voting during one day. Here is our second lesson. Due to time limits, the idea of postal voting was unrealistic. You have to watch your calendar and your watch if you want to amend act and to prepare legal framework. And also depriving the NEC of its powers made the whole procedure untrustworthy for most voters, even voters supporting the governing majority, and the voting on 10th May would not be trusted by the voters. The second attempt to solve the problems was in the second act, which was adopted on 12th of May. It was the act on postal voting on demand, not totally postal, but on demand, and it was adopted by the lower chamber of parliament. There was a partial agreement between the governing majority and the opposition. This act was amended by the upper chamber of parliament and adopted at the beginning of July. This was our second act on organization of this election. Main provisions of this new act were: first, National Election Commission was responsible for all the preparation. That's good because voters trust NEC. Second, postal voting was only on demand, but available for all voters. Possible obligatory postal voting in COVID-attacked regions. There were 2 small regions with postal voting, obligatory postal voting due to COVID situation. And of course, standard safety regulations, which I'm not going to describe because they were standard and well known all over the world, established by the Ministry of Health. What was the social response, which is one of the most important factors during the election? The provisions of this second act were accepted by the voters, and we had high turnout. We didn't know what the turnout will be and what the validity of such election will be without high turnout. But the voters accepted almost the same provisions that were in the first act, but under control of NEC. And that's very important, that the NEC role made the whole procedure trustworthy. Of course, there were problems. First, that the short and limited election campaign influenced the whole procedure. Second, that short deadlines. We had all the preparations during 3 weeks. Short deadlines made problems with postal voting abroad. But there were no problems with voting in Poland, and that's because NEC knows its business, and we could prepare everything properly. And here is the third lesson. First, that electoral law should describe solutions for extraordinary situations more precisely. We have some regulations, but they were not enough for such special situation. Second, that independent EMB role is crucial for the social response. And third, that more important elements of the election process should be described in the Constitution, because they are not described in our Constitution. They are only described in the Electoral Code. And that's the problem, because they may be changed ad hoc by politicians. This should not be done. And the only way to avoid such ad hoc changes is to describe important parts of the whole process in the Constitution. As I said at the beginning, the problems with electoral law and legislation were main problems of this election. In fact, at the end, when the election came, we had no serious problems and everything went quite well. These are our lessons, more from legislation, less from the voting, the electoral process itself. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christoph. An excellent presentation. And we also thank you for sharing with us the beautiful background of the city of Warsaw. So with that, we will open the floor. We do have a few questions. The first question that came in was, I think it's not directed to any one person, but is, will any are any of your countries going to be using, or have they used, indelible ink during the most recent or for the next elections? Anybody? I'm not sure. I don't think any of your countries actually require it as a measure to control the voter registration and to ensure people only vote once. But any responses to that? If not, let's see. There was a question that came in that was directed to Laura. Let's see. It was with regard to the issue that you raised about political campaigns and the difficulty of trying to adapt during a time of COVID, because you want to make sure people are safe, but at the same time, there are restrictions on numbers of people that can meet, and you can also, so the campaigns and the parties are hampered by that. Do you have any recommended measures for dealing with this?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's a really important question, and actually we have and we had many conversations with our Ministry of Health how to solve the problem and which recommendations we can give for our candidates, campaign participants, political parties, voters, and etc. And yeah, right now we're saying that everybody should keep the safe social distance, to wear personal safety equipment, and yeah, today we can have events, we can go from door to door, have meetings, but of course we're saying that would be nice to have conversations with voters via internet, via Facebook, and of course other platforms.
Okay. I've just gotten a message from our president of the ACEEO board, Tamar Zvania, and she would like to ask her question online.
Thank you, dear Richard, Mr. Moderator, for allowing me this to ask the question. Actually, first of all, many thanks for the excellent presentations and information shared. So my question goes to Laura and to the colleague from North Macedonia. So one experience is with regard to planned elections, I mean in Lietuva, which will be held on 11th of October. And another experience we've seen, it was already conducted elections in North Macedonia. So maybe I missed, but for instance, Laura talked about those people being in quarantine. But I would like to learn more about your experience or plans with regard to already confirmed cases of those voters who are COVID infected. And they are in the hospitals, because what I've seen in different countries' experiences, we've seen some South Korea experience when they allowed those people to vote in mail format, and we've seen some experience of India. What is your experience in this regard? I mean North Macedonia, and what is your plan? I mean, in Lietuva, in this regard, when it comes to the COVID-19 coronavirus confirmed cases and those people being in hospitals.
Thank you, dear Tamar, for very important questions. And yes, we're planning that voters and self-isolation, I mean, at home, and voters with COVID-19 symptoms, infection, which will be at home, we have the right to vote. We will have the right to vote, of course, and it doesn't matter where will be at home or in the hospital, we will have the right to vote, but of course we will give for polling station members more personal equipment, and not only gloves, masks, but suits or something like that.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Zvania, for the question. We have another one. Let's see, assuming that on the actual election day, there will be voters who go to the polling place exhibiting symptoms of COVID-19, such as high temperature and cough. If they would not be allowed to cast their vote, how do we address the issue of disenfranchisement of their right? Is it all right for them not to be allowed to subsequently vote, even using alternate means, if their total numbers would no longer affect the election results? That's an excellent question that comes from our friends in the Philippines, from the COMELEC, and I think all the panelists will do a great job responding. Thank you. Please, who would like to lead off? Just as a follow-up, how, for the elections that you have held, the ones that have already been held, how have you dealt with the issue of not people that haven't gotten sick yet, but ones who are sick and who are either at home or in the hospital, or who haven't actually yet gone into any type of self-quarantine? Have you been faced with that? And have you had to make arrangements if they show up at the polling station, have you had to make arrangements at a later time to allow them to be able to vote? Christoph, did you have any issues with that in the elections that you had in July?
No, in fact, we were at least partially prepared for such cases. It's of course very difficult to prepare all the polling stations for such circumstances, but as far as we know, there were no cases of voters with explicit high temperature, cough, and so on. No information about such cases came to us. That's perhaps because other ways of voting were prepared for such voters, and they did not come to the polling stations. They decided to stay at home. They could arrange postal voting at the last moment, even at the last moment. So it seems that such voters that were not hospitalized, not under quarantine, but possibly ill, decided before that they will vote by post.
Thank you. Would anyone else care to respond? If not, I don't see that we have any more questions, but I would like to ask one question, because I think it would be interesting if any of you, as you have prepared your protocols and your procedures to deal and implement with the elections, if you have actually hired people on your staffs who are public health officials, obviously maybe scientists, anything like that, that might be something going forward that election management bodies may have to consider, not only for this pandemic, but maybe also someone, we may have others in the future. Laura, have you all consulted with any of the public health officials? And do you actually have a member of your staff who is like an identified, either a professional in that field or someone who's been identified as a coordinator to kind of basically oversee all the preparations and protocols?
Yes, thank you, dear Richard. Actually, we're cooperating very close with our Ministry of Health, and we're asking for recommendations, other information. Our government decided to give for each voter mask, so I don't know what to say more about that.
Okay. I know Christoph had was raised his hand.
Yes, I think the solution in Poland was quite good because the responsibility for health preparations was the responsibility of Ministry of Health. And by the act that was adopted for this election, the Ministry of Health was obliged to give recommendations and provisions for health security in the polling stations and in the postal voting. This was their business. I don't think the National Election Commission should be deeply involved in such decisions. Of course, they have to be sort of purely health security decisions, and the role of NEC in such case is to think about what's the influence of these decisions on electoral process itself. But there are specialists in health problems, and they should solve these problems. The role of NEC is only to think about possible influence of these provisions to the elections, to the rights of voters.
Thank you. Enver, please.
Thank you, Mr. Richard. The case in North Macedonia was we have cooperated with healthcare system, and we have made some questions to the specialists to ask them what we can do in special occasion, for example, sharing the election materials in the day of voting or the day after. Then we have received a kind of protocols, and we have worked with those protocols, and we have finished the elections. This is what I would like to say. We have cooperated with them, and we have asked them for answers of any kind of situation that we thought the situation is very important for the voters, or to stop spreading the infection. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Damir, do you want to also add anything on that with regard to how you're coordinated with the public health officials?
Yes, we also have in Croatia very good cooperation with public health, and all our measures we prepare in cooperation with public health authorities.
Very good. Well, I think with that, the panel has just been outstanding. We want to thank Damir Kontrek, Laura Majosaititsa, Enver Salihi, and Christoph Lorenz. All of you, I think, have really enlightened us with regard to this important issue of how election officials have responded in the face of emergency. And you all, if judging on what you've done is an example of what people elsewhere around the world are doing, then even though our health is at risk, fortunately, thanks to you, our democracies are not. So please all join with me in giving a virtual applause. And with that, this concludes this panel. And I think we're on schedule. So now I will turn it back over to our Secretary General, Zsolt Szolnoki. Thank you all for your participation.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Richard, for your excellent moderation, and also for the speakers of this last panel. I was even amazed by all speakers, especially with the movie from Enver. I think it might be a new category for presentation from next year. So if you are making a movie as well, you will get an extra gift maybe or something like this.